Eric, welcome to the podcast / show. We still don't know if it's podcast or show, so either way, thank you for being here. Excited. This is episode number 3. I think that you bring a lot of experience in the community solar industry, and I'm really excited to talk to you. I'm just going to give you a little bit of an intro, and then we'll, I guess, go from there.
Love to be here, Colton.
Thanks,
this is great.
So, Eric Pasi, over 16 years of working in community solar, the once co-owner and chief development officer of Impact Power Solutions, board member and treasurer of Minnesota Solar Energy Industries Association, author of Clean Wave, a guide to success in the green recovery, and now CEO of community solar developer of Enterprise Energy. Welcome to the show.
Well, that was a mouthful for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, you've done quite a bit of things over the last 16 years.
Just a few, yeah.
Yeah, so I'd hope so. So, kind of as I was explaining on the last podcast with Raul before we started, essentially my goal with these interviews is to bring on folks like yourself who have extensive experience in some form of environmental work and just share your experience so that folks out there, similar to how I was, and I'm sure you were at some point too, who are looking to get started in environmental work can see all the different opportunities. That way you don't feel so pigeonholed just to become a park ranger or just to become a solar installer. You can be like, hey, this is a job that exists, and maybe that's something I could do too. So today we're going to talk a little bit about your experience so that folks out there that are in that boat can see what you do. So awesome. So I know that in 2006, you graduated from the University of Minnesota with a dual degree in marketing and entrepreneurial management. When you were exiting college, what were you thinking? Did you know you wanted to get into renewables?
Yeah, so just to back up a slight step further, I came into college like most people, not really knowing what I wanted to do. I'd gotten a scholarship for carrying golf clubs. It was a caddy scholarship. It's called the Evans Scholarship.
Didn't even know that existed.
And I in my time as a caddy got to interact with a lot of business people, and also the business school is the hardest school to get into, so I was kind of like, okay, well, I'll go there, we'll figure it out. I had an extreme passion for music at that time, so I was in a bunch of different musical acts through college, and then after college as well. And so my initial plan was to go to production school and become like a music producer.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that was plan A. I came into college with about a semester worth of credits, but it still took me a good 5.5 years to get through. And I blame that on, or publicly on having 2 majors, even though, easily could have done that in like 3.5 years probably, but I loved college. So much so, that it took me that long. At the tail end of my collegiate career, I was like, okay, man, what do I want to do? I have to get a job soon. And I was really passionate and struck by the climate crisis. I saw a movie like many people did back in that day, which was An Inconvenient Truth by Al Gore. Won the Academy Award for Best Documentary, I think back in 2006 or 2007. And the science really spoke to me. I started doing research in the fall of 2006. Okay, what can I do as it relates to this space? And in that search, I noted that renewables were on like an exponential growth curve, and it didn't just technology at that time. Obviously, the internet was in full swing. It doesn't take long with an exponential growth curve to become like the overwhelmingly dominant source of anything, energy in this case. So I was really excited about that. I'm a closet nerd as well, so I really dig the fact that everything's changing so fast. There's a high tech aspect to what we do. That I started sending out my resume to probably 36 or so companies. Some that and many that I didn't, and at that time. And IPS, which we were named Innovative Power Systems at that time, was the only one to call me back. And I tell this story a little bit to because Jamie Burrell, who is my business partner, along with Ralph Jacobson, I kind of give him crap for this, but when I met him, he had like a cast on, and he was hiring for a sales role, which he was a sales manager, and I was always like, man, this is kind of dangerous. It looks dangerous. I kind of want to do this, whatever it is. And later on, I had like this Usual Suspects type moment where I was like, wait, he needed somebody to climb the ladder because he couldn't with that cast. So maybe I was just in the right place at the right time. But yeah, I got hired on as a sales rep. It was really challenging. As you can imagine, in 2007, the price of solar panels was almost 20 times as much as it is today.
Holy cow.
So, the only people we were selling to were people with means and ideals, doctors, architects who thought it was cool, technology was cool, but not for practical reasons necessarily. And I was commission only. And so that in itself was pretty daunting, but what I knew at that time was like, I don't have a mortgage. I don't have kids. Like, if I'm going to take a risk like this is as good a time as it's going to be to do it. So I started, I really believed in myself, or I at first didn't, but then I just kind of grew into it. And it was, set it up for, one of the most awesome journeys, that I'm probably ever going to be a part of. And I'm sure we'll get into a lot of that. But yeah, it kind of started in sales and then evolved from there.
So it was 20 times more than what it is now. So you were selling like $60 a watt?
Well, the panels.
Okay.
So panels now, I mean, if you're not in the US, you get panels for like in 12 cents maybe a watt, DC, which is how we measure it. Here in the US, it's closer to 30 right now. And we were buying panels back then at like $6 a watt.
Oof. Duh. Okay. But commission only. So how was it just like, hey, if I make one sale a quarter, I'm set?
Yeah. and like, I have such fond memories of it because like we were just like making it as I was learning, right? And I remember the first job I ever sold, solar domestic hot water system, to the Vanderfords. Shout out if you're watching, in West St. Paul, 2 panels. And that was about 3 months, four months in, on the job. And, I remember the sales process. Like, I went into MS Paint. I took a photo of their roof, imported that into Microsoft Paint, made like little panels on their roof. And I'm like, hey, this is what it's going to look like. Sold that job. And, yeah, that was the first of maybe a handful that first year. I definitely earned below the poverty line in that first year. But that's how I think like good stories are made, like you just do it, and you don't, especially early in your career, you don't expect things, you make it happen. And that's what I did. And
so was it just Jamie and Ralph when you joined?
It was Jamie, Ralph, Buzz. We had about a team of 8 or so.
Okay.
So we had a production side of what we were doing, which were the installers, and we had an engineer, we had a project manager. But things were so in flux. Like I remember going to interview at that time, and like it was in the basement of this like decrepit warehouse in kind of near campus, and I'm sure like mold was growing everywhere, and we the meeting room was like this bright, obnoxious orange color, and like it just all didn't make any sense to anybody but me, I guess. Yeah, so it was a ragtag team for sure at the beginning.
Definitely. And you applied to, you said a half dozen, and they're the only ones that got back to you.
Yeah.
Dang. And this was back in the day when solar wasn't that popular. So how did you know that solar was what you wanted to get into? Why not wind? I guess what else was really popular back then?
I wanted to get into wind.
Okay.
I submitted my resume, but it's the catch-22 coming out of college. It's less so now, but we were heading into a recession, wasn't quite hitting at that time, the Great Recession. But if you don't have experience, people don't want to hire you, and then how do you get experience? Like, that's kind of the classic conundrum for people.
Yeah.
And so I didn't have any relevant like internship experience, which I always usually like recommend to people. I didn't have like, I wasn't a part of any, interest groups or organizations, trade associations, any of that. So like, I'm sure my resume just like, flew off the, the recruiter's desk and into the recycling bin. But I'm glad that it worked out that way, because I think getting into like a bigger company at that time, I could have definitely got lost in, the corporate politics. If you can get unlucky in some of those situations, whereas like I just through like my own, tenacity or just like, I was just dumb. Like if somebody told me it couldn't get done, like I wouldn't necessarily believe them, and I would just do it,
See, but that's kind of the nice thing about small business. So I had just the opposite experience. So when I graduated, I went and worked for a medical nutritional supplement company because I graduated with biochem, which was a terrible decision now looking back on it, because I had zero interest in it, but I got that degree. But I knew I didn't want to go into the lab, so I went and I worked sales because the only thing I was qualified to do was sell stuff. So I was like, okay, if I get into sales, then I can pivot from sales in the medical industry to sales into the renewables, or I knew I wanted to be environmental. I didn't know exactly renewables. So went into sales, did that for like a year and a half, and then it ended up kind of like you, applying for every job that I could find, and then just so happened to luck into a job with a very large EV company that also sold solar panels, that does way too many things nowadays. But essentially I lucked into that job, and it was back in Minnesota. And it was very much, I was coming from a medium-sized business, so there was like one rep in each state, to this large conglomerate multinational, and you very much get lost in the shuffle. It was like, hey, you are just a number. You are replaceable. If you do not hit your numbers, it does not matter. We can replace you. And that stunk. And all like that little bit of innovation that you could do at that medium-sized company went out the door. It didn't really matter. You just like had to hit your numbers. So that sucked. But then I switched to Solar Connection out in Rochester, which shout out to Solar Connection. Arguably the best job I ever had.
I used to work, well, I mean, he might have told you that, or you may have known that. I used to work with Kurt. Kurt used to work at IPS.
Yeah.
I was back in the day, yeah.
So Kurt's a lovely man. I left shortly after he sold to Matthew Construction. And that's actually one of my questions later on, is navigating mergers and acquisitions, because that changed a lot, because it went from like, hey, I like marketing and I like sales and I like SOP development and so on and so forth. And it was like, now you are just a salesperson. And it was like, that kind of stunk. So do you think if you did it again, you would recommend to people who are hopping out of college to join startups and in the renewable sector, or would you still recommend, or would you recommend now to try to grow with a larger company?
I think it's unique to each person, but I strongly believe that you're going to learn the most in a small business setting, and you're going to have, like you mentioned, highest impact on day-to-day operations in that setting. And I think you create an opportunity for yourself to learn a bunch of different things. And whether you do that at the beginning, or if you feel like you need more structure and you want to really specify in like one area, then maybe that's not for you. But for almost everybody I talk to, I'm always like promoting like, hey, just get into a smaller business, help it grow and see what happens. Like I think there's little that you give up by doing that.
Which is kind of what you guys are still small, 7 people, which we'll get into in a little bit, but now it's kind of fun because I see you applying for a lot of, or not applying, but posting for a lot of fun jobs, so it'll be cool to see how you guys grow too. So then when you started as an associate, obviously you developed into multiple different roles within IPS. Was there a certain point in your career there that you're like, hey, I took on this one project and I did good, and then I opened the door to other things? What's that story look like?
Yeah, I always think about Ed Eichten, whose family owns a cheese farm in Chisago County. If you're ever driving down 8 out there, you used to see like this big mouse with a cheese wheel, and they have a cafe out there. His family, Ed knew my grandfather through working at 3M, and so I got kind of a warm introduction there. But so we ended up installing a 40 kilowatt system for his cheese operation. That was a really interesting project because I worked with the bank to get the loan, help him get the loan. I worked on a USDA grant. I, just from start to finish, I think I worked extra hard on that project because I didn't, I didn't want to fail and like make my grandpa look bad or something. And that set us up. Like the project went relatively well. We were in some financially, kind of dire straits at that time at IPS because, it was 2012, I think, and there was competition that we had that we were like getting smoked. So we needed to figure something out quick, which we did. But back to the Eichten story, it was that like it went well, and he kind of offhanded comment when we were going through when we did the walkthrough, was that, hey, like I got this field over here, not doing anything with it. Could we put in a solar farm? I see them on TV or whatever, and I said that there's no real infrastructure in place to allow that financially to happen, but I'll definitely keep it in mind. Fast forward in a year later, in 2013, Solar Jobs Act passes in Minnesota, and with it, the community solar program in the state. And then like later that year, in 2014, I came back to him and said, hey, like now there is actually a chance to do this. And we, went, we didn't know what we were doing. We brought, we posted that this was going to be the first community solar project in Chisago County. No idea if that was going to happen or not. And then Mortensen came out, we had other competitors, kind of what's going on. WCCO is showing up, and I'm like, oh, NPR is interview. I was like, well, that's okay. Well, now we have to do it, and thank goodness, the interconnection process went great. And we celebrated with the ribbon cutting probably 3 years after that. But it happened, and that's definitely kind of the cornerstone of the transition from doing kind of smaller bespoke solar projects to then these cookie cutter community solar projects. And they're subscribed to that project. The senior living facility down the road subscribed to it. School district in the county subscribed to it. So it was a lot of stakeholders, and that's, I think, the story of my career is just kind of building these partnerships and stakeholders and bringing them together. And it's that, and that's what I find most fun about what I do.
So a lot of our listeners, they might not know the difference between community solar versus industrial versus commercial versus residential. Can you give just kind of a brief, or as long as you would like, overview of what community solar is and the different stakeholders that are involved?
At its essence, community solar allows people and businesses to participate in the clean energy space without putting panels on their property. I think it's somewhere between 70 and 80% of people can't access solar because they have a bad roof for it, they're renting, Their business is leasing, space. So this really is a way to democratize access to solar. And so it works. You've got a developer and a owner operator of solar project that installs it. A solar farm could also be on a building, a large rooftop. And then we work with people that go and subscribe, individuals or businesses or municipalities, school districts, to those projects. They get a bill credit every month, and then we bill back, or the owner bills back a portion of those savings, so that there's like a net benefit to anybody that participates. Community solar was relatively niche. Well, it was niche in 2013 when the bill passed. Colorado kind of, and maybe Massachusetts had the only kind of functioning programs. But we went from probably 50 megawatts nationwide at that time to now we're talking about like 10 gigawatts in a couple of years. Like it's a, on its own growth curve. And now we talk about community solar as like the fourth pillar of the solar industry, utility scale, commercial, and residential being the other three. And so yeah, it's really, and now there are 20 states that have programs like it, and I love it because it aligns with my personal my personal ethos, which is that everybody should have a shot. Like we shouldn't be excluding people from the clean energy revolution. And I grew up single mom household, got a Pell Grant, and financial aid based scholarships and stuff like that. And so I think of it as a way to pay it forward too. And so yeah, that's what community solar is and what it means to me.
So when you come across nowadays for community solar, because I'm not as familiar on how they get developed, does like the utility put out an RFP and it's like, hey, we are going to put in a community solar, or is it more like a landowner comes to you and says, hey, I have 40 acres, I'd love to do something with it, what can you make happen?
Each market is unique. So in Minnesota, for instance, traditionally we've been able to bring or develop a project and then and build it. And the only kind of gatekeeping that would happen in that scenario is interconnection with the utility. So if the utility costs were too high, then we couldn't do the project. In other places like Illinois or New Mexico, for instance, like those are merit-based and scoring-based criteria. They have criteria in which projects are approved. So in those cases, it is more like an RFP. And each state seems to have its own wrinkle when it comes to these programs. But typically, it really does start with the landowner or with the farmer. And then, it progresses from there with the utility, and then with the regulators or usually like a state agency. And that's kind of the trend, I think, that we're seeing.
Gotcha. So when you painted yourself back into a corner and you said, hey, yeah, we could probably do this community solar, did you then have to go out and find all the subscribers? Or
Yeah, we did. And well, at that time, it's not like today. Today there are a lot of technology companies, for instance, a lot of companies that have dealt with like marketing in deregulated states that where you can choose essentially where your energy comes from. Those folks and that like vertical within community solar has really evolved to the point where like you're getting Instagram ads, you're getting direct marketing campaigns that where you can do a high volume of residential sales. And what we're seeing a lot too is that the policymakers that have developed these programs really prefer that the benefits go to residents, and increasingly like low and moderate income residents in these states. So there's a big push to market and to get those folks involved. At the outset, though, that wasn't the case. We didn't have that infrastructure. Companies didn't have that infrastructure. So what we did, we were fortunate in the years previous to like the program our Minnesota Community Solar Program opening, that we had done a lot of work with school districts, and that's another kind of like, fond, memory that I have in working with IPS, was that we created this program called the Sunrise Solar Program. So we would finance the project on the roof of a school. They wouldn't have to pay any money up front. These were 40 kilowatt systems. Then we would provide training to the teachers to incorporate learning about clean energy into the classroom. They'd have access to the data from the roof. They could do different projects to see, how does weather affect production, and really kind of bring it home for the students. And it was that kind of like little twist on innovation that we had a lot of uptake on it. And so when community solar came around, it was like, well, we only provided 2% of your school's load with the system on the roof, but now we can do 100% with community solar. So a lot of our early clients were school districts, and like Red Wing School District, we put in like a 5 megawatt project adjacent to their high school that they were just leasing for farmland. And that was like one of the cornerstone projects that we did. We flew tons of drones on that one to get good photos and video and stuff. So that project, I mentioned Chisago County school, or Chisago school districts. We did like Holdingford, St. Cloud, Paynesville, and the other thing, like the other fond memory I had about all that time was like traveling. Like I would drive, to not very far, like an hour to 2 hours, and get to see a lot of Minnesota and meet with a lot of different people and school boards, and that was a fun time. But yeah, it was nowadays it's different, right? Because we are trying to involve more residents in these projects, and less on the kind of larger commercial side.
Yeah, I personally love working with schools. We've worked with Renew Wisconsin once for a project with Legacy Solar Co-op, and they do the Solar for Schools program with the Couillard Foundation. Big fan. I've seen a couple school installs. I've never sold a school install, but I appreciate it. And then we've also worked with Kidwind.
I love Kidwind.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Michael Arquin.
Today's great, but like Kidwind project this year was the best project of the year for sure.
Did you go to the ACP?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. We did their Worlds competition, which if anyone's watching and you have kids, you should get your kid into Kidwind. It's a renewable energy competition. You make a windmill and then you test on a variety of metrics. It's all fun and play. There is winners and losers, but for the most part, everybody's a winner. So yeah, I absolutely love Kidwind. I love seeing so many students are getting so excited about renewables. I think that like environmental science is one of the most popular majors at college now. Everybody just wants careers that just mean a little bit more than just pushing the latest tech, it seems. So it's kind of fun. What would you attribute to, I guess, all of you went through multiple different promotions at IPS. What would you accredit most to kind of rising through the ranks?
Well, I mean, it was a small company. One time, I remember this, it was like must have been 2014. It was the first year of the Midwest Solar Expo, and it was held in Minnesota. And my title at that time was like sales associate or something. And then Jamie, who is the sales manager, was like, if you're going to speak on this panel at the thing, why don't we just call you like VP of development or something? It's like, sounds better than sales associate. And I was like, all right. So I just got promoted. It's like one of those things. And so I kind of grew into that role. And I really took that one like to heart, because, community solar was just happening at that time. I was on a panel about like, what do you predictions for the Minnesota community solar market. And I joked at that time, like I was on the panel just to like, I was wanting to learn what the other people were saying about it. But it was, so I kind of morphed into like chief development officer, within, 3 years after that. So I became like a partner, and state shareholder in the company, kind of through that time. and kind of held that title. And then I started doing like more management, and we'll probably talk a little bit about like the acquisition process, but like after the acquisition, then I really just kind of focused in on policy. So I was doing a lot of just like market intelligence and making sure that our teams were oriented in the right way when we were, going out to develop projects and wherever we were going to go. And so, it kind of, once you gain that knowledge in whatever certain aspect of the business, it's hard not to, as the organization grows, you kind of have to start specializing. And for a lot of people, myself included, it gets hard because like you said, you're used to kind of touching different aspects of the business, and you enjoy the variety. And when you're kind of pigeonholed to do one particular thing or maybe a few, you long for the other side of it. So that was definitely one of the bigger challenges as my career evolved.
Okay. So I guess that kind of leads into the next question. So obviously IPS was acquired or merged or whatever the technical term is with New Energy Equity. I personally went through one merger and it was okay. It wasn't my favorite experience. I'd be very curious to get your opinion or just advice on how to navigate those waters. What went well, what didn't go well. What, if you had to do that all over again, what would you recommend for people to do to make that smoother for their careers?
Yeah, it's always tricky. I think and anybody that was involved would admit that change is difficult. I have nothing but love for everybody at New Energy and at IPS and at Elite. So behind the curtains, it was very difficult at first because you can't talk about it, right? So you're kind of left on an island, and your team doesn't know, and you can't tell them. And so the secrecy aspect of it really is isolating. And it wasn't until, you get much further down the road. Literally, we called a meeting the day of the announcement, and we had to change, our marketing. We had to change our name. Our team spent so much time on branding, in the months after the acquisition. And then we had the difficult task of merging cultures with New Energy and with Elite. But one of my favorite memories of that era, Elite is based in Duluth. I'm a huge booster for Duluth. I love Duluth. I have a cabin up there going to today, actually.
Nice. Hopefully it stops raining.
Yeah, no, right. And so we took the team up. This was in like September of 2022, and early September. So it was probably like 4 months after the acquisition, and we got everybody to kind of meet with their counterparts at Elite. This was the Roseville office, the IPS folks, and it ended up being like a gorgeous mid-80s, low 80s day in Duluth, and we had we did a e-bike tour. We met with Bethany, who's the CEO. We met with everybody met with different folks, and we were exposed to like, okay, this is Elite, and this is we're part of this family now. And we went out for dinner, and we kind of had like a pretty big rager at my place, and in a good way. In HR, if you're watching, don't track me down. And it was very cathartic because everybody gets on edge, right?
You're just worried if you're gonna have a job,
right?
Like that was, at least for me during the merger, it was like, is my job going away? Are
Right.
these things that I like doing no longer a thing I can do? So,
Yeah, and that's the biggest challenge is the HR and the people aspect of going through it, because everybody experiences things differently, and change again is difficult. But yeah, that one day was really fun. We had, and I would actually recommend this. Matt Hankey, who's the CEO over at New Energy Equity now, had commissioned, I forget which brewery it was, but to make, he called it Integration Ale. So it's like a pale ale.
Okay.
And it had like, a wrap, on all the beer cans and stuff that said like, welcome to the family type thing.
That's
and
cool.
Like all the companies coming together. And so we were drinking a decent amount of it that night. But yeah, it's, you kind of have to, you can't take it too seriously. I think there's a tendency to do that. You got to maintain and hold on to the culture, and it was hard, right? We had to merge our core values, and it was, I think, could have been done better. But again, it's changed, and it was hard at that time. But the work really continues, and they're doing great work. So I think it's good.
Yeah, they're definitely doing a lot of great work. I know they did their summer solstice, was that last week, 2 weeks ago? So they obviously still have a presence here. And I do have friends over there. Megan Shake, she works over at New Energy. Used to work with her before you guys at IPS actually took her away from us at Solar Connection. And it wasn't a poach. She left on good terms, but yeah, she's a lovely lady as well. And she loves New Energy. So obviously good things to say there too. So, you ended up going and becoming the vice president, correct, at New Energy for 9 months, something like that.
I was there for a year and a quarter.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what ended up making you decide then to leave and try something different?
Yeah. A perspective, really, I think. It's hard to know when, a big change is the right time. That January, my grandpa broke his femur. My grandma, who is kind of advanced Alzheimer's, needed a full-time caregiver. My mom moved in with her while my grandpa did rehab. Correspondingly, like after we took my mom on vacation that spring in 2022, or last year, 2023, we found out that she had cancer right after that. And she was starting chemo, and I was like, can you swear in this?
Yeah,
shit?
yeah. It's
I was like,
going on YouTube.
I was like, fuck, life is short. And so like I knew at that time, like, okay, I got to take a little bit of time off. I'm gonna go with my mom, and I'm her only child. I have half siblings, but I'm her only child. I'm going to go to all the appointments and do all the things, and take some time with the family. Obviously, like after a successful exit, it's easier to do that. But I knew that at my heart of hearts, like when I was ready to come back to work, that it, like I couldn't be at my current position. I wanted to do something different, and I was at a point in my career where I felt like I learned a lot, and now might be a good chance to do something more entrepreneurial. So I went, started with going to all my mom's appointments, took family on vacation, and then my former colleague, Evan Carlson, had left about a year and a half before before I did, and started this company called Enterprise Energy. And I decided that I was going to go to SPI or RE Plus, which is our biggest convention of the year. I was going to, just kind of see what was up. Evan and I are the same age, essentially, and saw eye to eye on a lot of things. And, he was selling hard on me joining him. And I knew from our time together, like, he was an A player, but I also knew that he probably needs some help. So yeah, we had conversations, and my mom was responding well to treatment, and so I knew that, like, things were heading in the right direction. And that was the time that I was just like, okay, I think this is the moment. And for a lot of different reasons, like, I have the opportunity now to, like, put a stamp and do things the way that I really think can and should be done. Things that the way that they can and should be done. And yeah, so I'm like super excited about it. We're really focusing on the equity and energy access issues that I think sometimes plague other developers in the space. We can easily think about things in just numbers, right? And how many projects get closed, or what the P&L looks like. But at the end of the day, what matters, and I think from our perspective, it's changing people's lives positively, and that's where we're really focused in this new venture. And I'm, like, really lucky to have the team that we do right now, and I'm really excited to see how things grow from there. So yeah, that's in a nutshell, like, what's transpired over the last year or so.
So just a little bit.
Yeah.
So, yeah. How are you guys focusing more on the equity standpoint? Is it just basically you're trying to market, or you're trying to get more people that are less privileged to get into these community solars, or what does that look like?
Yeah, focusing more on workforce development.
Okay.
And I have a lot of experience also with working with, like, CAP agencies, for instance, or public housing, where, yeah, it's great to provide some, nominal savings for people. But again, is that, how is that affecting their lives? I mean, if I'm going to save $10 a month, like, am I, better off? I guess a little bit. But do I really appreciate or understand, like, the where and how these things are put together? Whereas if I'm, exposed to community solar in a way that can give me gainful employment, that's a different level, right? And we need people, right? I think the latest SIA numbers came out, like, we need 1 million electricians for the energy transition. Where are those people coming from? The trades are suffering, right? Because young people, there's a stigma behind working in some of these fields that, so we're seeing, like, the average age of the tradespeople, like, soaring through the roof, right? We're not getting enough young talent. And I think the more that people can see themselves in these careers, and that it's not just for, like, for lack of a better word, like, old white men, that's where I think we can really dig in. So workforce development, providing and co-locating these types of projects with other land use. So really innovating on that side of the fence, whether it's multifamily, other, the storage, self-storage industry, becoming more creative with these projects, because everything's been, people are sick of hearing about it in a lot of cases. Like, how can we do a better job, we being the industry, in creating these projects and leaving, lasting legacy or positive impact on the communities in which we serve. So those are the things, and it's hard, right? But I know that, like, it's when you do the hard work, that's like when you do the good work, right?
Yeah, definitely. Sometimes the harder projects that are more meaningful are more enjoyable to work on. I know that, at least for us, not to bring Kidwind up again, we bust our butts off for 4 days. That was a very hard project. Was that our most profitable project of the year? No, but did we help bring the story of how these kids are making windmills in their classroom and inspire hopefully other kids to pick up renewable energy? I think so. So that sometimes that helps. So what are some of then the initiatives that you've seen successful so far in your workforce development programs?
Yeah, on the workforce development side, some of this is public, some of it is still, I think, working its way through from my previous employer standpoint. So, but I've done a lot of workshops with students. So I think about Jamez Staples, North Minneapolis, his workforce training facility. Been a huge fan of his and the work that they're doing up there. I coordinated and did training mainly through my book, Clean Wave, and so I authored that book for the sole purpose of helping people find jobs in renewable energy. And it was really heartening because Jamez partners with Summit Academy on the north side of Minneapolis, which, if for the folks that are listening, Summit Academy works with high-risk youth and young adults to help them into various careers. And they have an electrician's program there, so I would go down there, give out copies of the book because, I have a bunch and they're just sitting there. And I'd rather somebody have it and talk with them about hey, here's what the future looks like. And then, we scheduled site visits to go check out systems. And we worked with Target, to go check out some of the projects that we built with them. And it was just a really good connection that we had there. I was also down in Chicago working on. They have a fantastic program with CEJA, the Clean Energy Jobs Act, that was passed probably 2-3 years ago, and are really making strides and have very committed efforts to helping people lift people out of their current situations, and so I went down there similarly, talking about clean energy jobs, giving away books, hanging out with people and answering questions, and we were doing similar things in other areas of the country, and it's those. You can get stuck in a rut, right? In a lot of ways in your job, you're just sitting behind a computer, you're doing this or that. And it's those, field trip type moments almost that you reconnect with purpose. And that is that's where it's at for me. I love those things. And that's where I find my energy and my passion around the whole thing, right? It's in affecting those, hopefully positively affecting people's lives.
I would think so. So, okay. So I haven't had the opportunity to read your book yet. Apologies. I'm still working on Rao's book from the previous podcast. So once I'm done with that one, then
I'm sure Rao's is probably a bit more.
It's a little
dense,
denser.
yeah.
It's more like a textbook. It's very much like a textbook. So it's the first couple chapters. I should say the first couple chapters, but at least the first chapter or so is all engineering concepts, and it's been a long time since I've taken physics, so I'm okay, let's try to remember and piece this together. Either way, once that one's done, I will get on to yours. But for those listening, obviously you mentioned electrician is a great job for a lot of folks, and that it's very highly in demand too. So it is a fantastic job. But what are some other jobs and career opportunities that you hint at in Clean Wave?
Yeah, so I wrote the book in 2020 because what else were we doing? Just sitting at home.
Yeah.
And at that time, it was mainly just to show that like renewable energy is not some esoteric and you need a 4-year degree in physics to like actually no, there's a myriad of different careers, and a lot of it spans just traditional business like accounting or marketing, sales, things like that. But I do like get into some of the more specific jobs in there, whether that be in like biotech, biogas. I interviewed entrepreneurs that are kind of working in that space. Also, wind technicians, hydrogen, people getting into hydrogen careers, and just really to demystify like what it is that people do, and make it approachable or seem approachable, which it is, and it doesn't need to be scary. And so it was mainly geared at, similar to you, I think you get inbound LinkedIn messages or emails about like, hey, my son is graduating in a year, and like, do you know of any internship opportunities? Or there are people out there that kind of are thirsting for the knowledge, right? And like, where do we go? So I just distilled it down into this book, and I added a lot of like personal anecdotes of just like my story, and that was up until 2020. So I've been working, and I'm gonna have to stop saying this at some point and actually do it, like a second edition.
Yeah.
And that was mainly, I think, to catch up, because the Inflation Reduction Act is such like an earthquake of like disruption that's happening, and it's changed so much in just this short amount of time. And I wanted to capture that, and I also wanted to like maybe correct some of the things that I got wrong, which might have been like green hydrogen, for instance, and also just talk about like what's happening, right? Like, and then also just to catch up through my own story, right? And so that is, I was working with a publisher. It's been on, it's been off, but the goal is, I think, to get it out in 2025.
Okay.
So stay tuned.
Okay. Well, when that comes out, we'll read that before having you on, and then we'll do a catch-up sesh. So, okay. So let's go a little bit then now into your new venture that you joined with Evan, Enterprise Energy. So we talked a little bit about how you're trying to do some things different, but it's still in the community solar sector. So why did you decide to stick with community solar rather than to do something different? Because obviously the market's a little bit more mature now.
Right. So community solar, it's just my passion. Like I believe in it, and I believe in its ability to create opportunity for people. I also know a ton about it. So like, it felt to me, if I were to pivot to something else at this point, why do it? Because like, I'm like super passionate about it. I know a lot, and I think that there's innovation yet to happen.
Okay.
There.
So what would be some of those innovations you hope to do with the new company?
Right. So I talked a little bit about kind of workforce. I also talked a little bit about like changing how these developments get sited and where they are, and so like we are a lot of our projects that we're working on right now are more urban, and that is to address some of the typical challenges that you have with interconnection queues. So intuitively, right, like a lot of people are putting these projects out in these certain areas, farmland, and the line or the queue essentially to interconnect those projects is super long. and so everybody's kind of doing the same thing, and we need to start thinking about things differently. And we also get a lot of pushback in those areas for NIMBYism, or in the case of like Chisago County, there's 100 of them up there. So like where do you draw the line? You have to at some point. So like we are just thinking about like what is version, and I use this a lot, but like version 2.0, like where is that version 3.0? Where is what was it Gretzky that said, skate to where the puck is going, not where it is now.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's some hockey adage there. So that's what we're doing. So we're really pushing the envelope. These projects are harder. They're more expensive. But ultimately I think that's where we're going. So, and then you have to create the mindset of the company around innovation and around that, and getting people that are super committed to like wanting to create change, because it's hard, and it's not easy, and we want the folks that are like down to tackle those big questions and big challenges.
So when you say urban settings, are you saying like you're trying to do it on like local high schools or local buildings downtown? I guess
usually
I'm not as familiar.
So maybe suburban versus urban. However, I do think that there are a lot of opportunities in more urban settings too. But we're trying to kind of just change the paradigm of like, these things are just, they're ugly, they're an eyesore, there's nothing in it for the community. We'd rather have that space be industrial park. We'd rather have it be housing, increases the tax base. All of these like, the reasons against community solar, we're trying to like flip that on its head a bit, and it's hard, but we're I think we're about a year into it. Evan's about a year and a half into it. I'm or 2 years into it. I am 9 months ish into it, and I already think like we're on our way to like some good things here in the second half of this year, as well as like moving into 25. So
Well, yeah, I would say like every 3 months I see a new job posting from you guys. So I know that you're currently hiring or looking for a mechanical engineer, or
so we just hired another electrical engineer.
okay.
We also hired an inside salesperson who started on Monday. We'll probably close to double in size this year. And then we want to do double again next year. But yeah, and a lot of that, we need to now start to communicate the story in a way that inspires people to want to come and be a part of like the team. And so we do, I'm doing stuff like this, and it's a challenging situation. I'm sure you've talked with other entrepreneurs, you talk with other business folks, that like the talent pool is like really tight, and you kind of have to do more as a business these days to really bring people in. But part of also, what you're doing and part of today that I really appreciate is like the reaching out beyond just like the echo chamber of just solar people or whatever, people at Mencia. It's, the idea is to get out in front of new faces and people that, might be on the fence about wanting to do something, and then helping them like take that next step of actually like, applying for a job.
Well, there's me and I think Izzy, she's the educational coordinator for Friends of the Boundary Waters. We had a conversation. It was actually like a test run of this podcast like last year, when it was much different business back then. But either way, and you just don't really know what opportunities are out there, which is kind of tough. When I was graduating college, it was very much, like, okay, I was going to be a vet, but I had pretty poor grades, to be honest. So like that really wasn't an option. And plus it's extremely expensive to be a vet, or as like a park ranger. Like those were my two options. So both of those are great careers, don't get me wrong, but I just didn't realize how many opportunities are out there in the environmental sector.
I'd love to see Colton, the vet park ranger.
Yeah.
That sounds like an awesome reality show.
Oh, dude, I wanted to be like Crocodile Dundee. Was kind of like my idol growing up. I was like, man, if I could do that. So I was like zoology vet, and I'll be like a traveling vet and make a show of it. I still think that there's a niche for that, and I would watch that show. But obviously, I don't have a vet degree, so that wasn't an option. So, but we do have a vet clinic that we're working with here soon, so maybe we can pitch it to them. So, but you just don't know what opportunities are out there. So I think that I've started to develop kind of a map in my mind where it's like environmental work, sustainability is a sector, which sustainability broadly means building stuff that is environmentally friendly. And then there's conservation, which instead of building stuff, you're just trying to keep things from going to shit. And then the right side is more like recreation, which is like park ranger, Patagonia, companies that do paddle north, things like that. And I'm starting to develop this map, and I don't know, maybe we'll add that to the website someday of all these different sectors. So I would say, sustainability, renewable energy, you can definitely get people who like graduated and they're like, oh, I always wanted to work for Patagonia. It's like, hey, that branding stuff that you wanted to do for Patagonia would be amazing for us, as a new startup working in community solar. So hopefully somebody out there who it was thinking maybe into the recreational space could come also into the sustainability space, because we obviously need people too. So what roles do you foresee needing filled in the next, I'll only say 3 to 6 months for Enterprise?
Well, I would say for sure we're going to have a title, the Crocodile Dundee Community
nice.
Solar.
Okay, deal. I'll be there.
Yeah. That's not a knife. This is a knife.
Yeah.
Oh, man. No. Sorry. Going down that tangent. So we're gonna be we'll be hiring more developers.
Okay.
We'll have a big announcement here probably in the next month or two related to like corporate finance and stuff, which will be help to kind of supercharge things. I'm not ready to talk too much about that yet, but we'll also be then hiring on the marketing front. I need somebody to help do these things with me and not just it be on my plate. We're going to be hiring a CFO. We'll be hiring more folks like just in the kind of structure of the business. And I think like whether that an HR specific role potentially, or if that's going to kind of blend with marketing for a little bit, and then kind of diversifying into two separate positions. So there's a lot that's at it. We've got our own kind of corporate planning coming up, and HR seems to be like it's a constant thing in a growing business, and in business in general. It's just like, okay, planning, what's our burn rate, what can we afford, and then more importantly to me at least, it's like who, right? Is this person a freaking all-star, and they're gonna figure something out to help us, and those are the people like that I get excited about.
So let's talk a little bit about that, because obviously there's going to be people who listen to this who do get excited and do want to apply for jobs potentially with you guys. Define an all-star in more detail?
Yeah, I think to me what it boils down to is like, are you passionate? What are you passionate about? And does that align with what we're passionate about? And I think that it's easier for us in renewables to find that, because the climate crisis is such, it touches everything, and you'd be hard pressed to find somebody that hasn't been personally affected by it. I think about my story. My dad was an immigrant from Tonga. I went to Tonga, visited there, and then I went to COP, which is the climate summit, global climate summit, 2 years ago in Egypt, and met with a ton of people from Tonga and Polynesia. And they're all, they're talking about the erasure of their history. And it's not necessarily just sea level rise, it's groundwater infiltration. It's deep sea mining. It's the exploitation of, capitalism in some of these areas, and the non-accountability that's happening. And I think about, I have 2 daughters. Last summer, 5 soccer practices and games got canceled because of the smoke. Never happened when I was growing up. So it's hard to find, like, everybody has that, right? Like something like that. And are you so disturbed by it that it creates, a positive momentum in your, like, your personal ambition,
like a level of urgency.
Yeah. And so I think that is probably one of the biggest. And I always try to mentor people, like, when they reach out and stuff, like, just show up. Are you, if you're interested, and so, like, you, Colton, you just start showing up to Mencia or whatever, and, like, just being there, not being afraid to, like, show up and be present. A lot of the other stuff just takes care of itself. But yeah, I think passion is, like, probably the number one thing that we look for. And it's not just that, like, oh, you're gonna work an 80-hour week. It's that you understand what's at stake and can like kind of self-prioritize, like, the things that you will have the biggest impact. So yeah, those couple of things, and you can teach a lot of the other stuff.
Okay. So what would be some entry-level positions? I'm not as familiar with, like, exactly the day-to-day of a developer. Obviously, a CFO would not be an entry-level position. But, well, if somebody is very passionate about community solar, they hear your story, they like what you do, they like what you stand for, what would be an entry-level position in the community solar world that they could apply for, assuming that it doesn't already exist at your company?
Yeah. So it'll be harder for us at the beginning because we are trying to, like, get specified roles. But in general, there are sales roles all the time, and a lot, and I would think about it from, like, an aggregator standpoint, or the folks that actually do the interface or face-to-face with the end users. If that's your type of if that's in your personality, I think that's a great entry-level position, because it requires people to have, like, the energy to go out and talk with people and help them essentially subscribe to these types of projects. I see a lot of, like, analyst positions. So from a finance perspective, if you graduated with a finance degree, if you graduated, call it like a master's of policy or a law degree, there's obviously, there are going to be openings for you in those disciplines, so, like, policy, for instance. And then I think, again, it just goes back to, like, the structure of just traditional business, like an accounting associate. I mentioned marketing already, and sales, but there aren't a ton of, like, super specific roles within community solar that are different, maybe, aside from, like, the subscriber acquisition, which is somewhat unique. But yeah, and analysts, junior level positions, there's a lot of ways to get in, for sure.
Okay. Well, we're right about the hour mark, so I'll keep to my word and let you go. But lastly, if people want to get a hold of you or connect with you, how can they do so?
Yes, ericpasi.com will just take you to my landing page of all the other things that I do. But primarily, like, cleanwavebook.com. That's where you can go check out the book. It's on Amazon, super easy. You get it in, like, 2 days or something. Also LinkedIn, so LinkedIn/in/Eric Pasi. I kind of, that's my second home, is LinkedIn. And enterpriseenergy.com. That's the business website, and we post career opportunities on there.
Well, perfect. Well, all that will be in the show notes below. Thank you, Eric. That's all. Thanks, I got Colton. For you today.
Yeah, it's been a blast. Yeah, cheers.